thank you for inviting me to be here with you. I want to begin by acknowledging, and I should have asked that, can I just do this like this?
Yeah.
Great. By acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, where we're meeting, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and paying my respects to elders, past and present, and also to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today and express my gratitude. I was thinking about this topic of the commons, so express my gratitude for your care of land, water, culture, each other, community over so many thousands of years. And this topic for me is really highlighted how much we have still to learn from you both. Most of us probably understand my topic, at least in part, as inferring that as social service organisations engaging with those on the margins, that we also have a role in promoting environmental justice. And, yes, we will get to that later. But before we start exploring the role of our organisations or the role of our sector more broadly, within the context of work within the commons, I think it's important that we first step back and look at who we are as organisations and as a sector, and how we understand reality, how we understand our purpose and our role. I'm concerned that if we don't do that, then we might simply opt to adopt environmental concerns as another topic to add to our list of issues. We can tick that box, strengthen our policies and practices in relation to stewardship of resources, speak up occasionally on matters that appear to be affecting the people who engage with our services, for example, after floods or fires, and generally endeavour to demonstrate that we're relevant. But not do the deep transformative work that I believe we're being called to, always, and especially at this time. To do that, the approach I'll take is to use one we often use at Jesuit Social Services. It comes from our Ignatian tradition, Ignatius being the person who founded the Jesuits about 500 years ago. And this framework uses 5 components: context, experience, reflection, action, and evaluation. So first I'm going to concentrate on our context. So I'll set the scene as I see it. And then on experience, I was asked to share my experience of how one organisation grappled with this topic over the years, and I'm sure you'll have your own stories and your own ways of wrestling with this issue. The other components, reflection, action, evaluation, are then really for you to do, relevant to your specific context. I'm not going to assume the particular issues you're grappling with. You're the best ones to reflect on what might be applicable in your setting. You're the ones to determine in your own situation what action then to take, and you are best placed to evaluate where you are and where you think our sector is. So to facilitate that goal along the way, I will ask a few questions and maybe just pause for 30 seconds and you can jot them down or think about them for later or whatever. So our first area, context. In examining our topic, the role of social services, our role within the commons, our starting point, as with any topic or issue under consideration, and last night they referred to this, must be our current context. And in the Jesuit tradition I operate within, that begins with taking what we call a realistic appraisal of reality, of how things actually are, not how we might want them to be or imagine them to be. So let's identify a few features of our current operating context relevant to our topic today. I'll look at the 3 components in this section. I'll pay particular attention to our community services operating environment. I'll touch briefly on some of the broader trends affecting society and therefore us, and finally very briefly on the church, which is of course part of our operating context. So let's start with the community services component, the sector that we are part of. To understand where we are now, it's valuable to take a few minutes to review our history, how we got to where we are now. Our history, in a Catholic Christian context, goes back, of course, to the life of Jesus, how he lived, his ministry to heal, restore, make whole. and by example and word, what he called us to. And over the centuries, the Church, in various ways, has responded to this call, individually and collectively. For example, feeding, housing, caring for people in need, developing hospices, and later schools and hospitals. Before going on to outline further the role of the Church in this arena, I think it's important, as others have, that I do note that this history is not without its faults. A realistic appraisal of reality insists that we acknowledge all kinds of abuses that occurred throughout this history and to this day, and obviously calls for a commitment to respond with compassion and justice to victims, survivors of this abuse, and to commit to doing everything we can to ensure that doesn't happen again. Here in Australia, now looking a little bit historically, the churches and religious organisations have been central to the important role that the community sector played in delivering services from the time of the invasion and subsequent white settlement of Australia. By the late 19th century, a number of church-based organisations provided direct services to people in precarious circumstances. Then, with a focus on responding to the needs of what we probably defined back then as the deserving poor, including orphans, children of single mothers, children who lived in poverty. By the late 19th century, both in churches and beyond, there was a growing understanding that broader social and economic factors, not personal failings, drove poverty, and the view that the state should play a key role in shielding its citizens from poverty. This was promoted widely in church circles. Within the Catholic Church, the promulgation of Pope Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum in 1891 heralded the genesis of the formal, influential body of church teaching on social justice, Catholic social teaching, which we've heard about a number of times here already, and I'm sure shapes much of our approach, with its four foundational principles of human dignity, the common good, subsidiarity and solidarity. And of course, social work alongside this, which developed in the 19th century, was also contending with similar issues. To what extent put a focus on the individual, to what extent try to dismantle unjust structures. Following the depression of the 1930s, a number of Australian church organisations strengthened their critique of social policy. And in the post-war period from 1945 and into the 1960s, organisations also began to advocate for long-term social policies aimed at promoting social justice. It was now okay to talk about intergenerational poverty and place-based disadvantage as ways to frame or understand personal issues, struggles and marginalisation. That era was characterised by the rapid growth of church-based organisations, while concurrently formal participation in churches was diminishing. The increasing professionalisation of services raised concern for some that there might be mission drift. Others recognised that they brought a perspective to the work that largely resonated with traditional religious values, but was more likely to be articulated in human rights terminology. Again, I think that speaker last night referred to that. And over time, as staff increasingly took up leadership roles in church-based organisations, decision-making shifted away from religious personnel, and I think we're still in the throes of that legacy. A concern, and Claire mentioned it last night, how Jesuit really is Jesuit social services, and I'm sure you get your version, how Catholic really is what you do. And then I think Claire shed a lot of light on that last night. The Whitlam era in Australia, 1972 to 75, heralded significant and broad social change with a great focus on empowering people and local community groups. At the same time, however, the economic downturn of the 1970s brought high inflation and unemployment across many Western economies, prompting political leaders to look for solutions in policies that favoured the free market, unconstrained by the state. And my guess is that Mark Considine tomorrow will be addressing that more fully. This signified a significant shift to neoliberalism, politically and economically, characterised by small government, free markets and constraints on social expenditure, all of which has shaped the contemporary welfare state, has shaped us. Successive Australian governments adopted and embedded neoliberal principles and practices across the broad array of government economic and social portfolios, which has seen service delivery increasingly outsourced to community and not-for-profits and for-profit sectors. And Mark Considine, to quote him, says it's the most important and most radical change to state-society relations since the advent of the modern welfare state. Remembering that really we are part of civic society, so as you weaken us, you weaken civic society. So Australia operates within a mixed economy model involving state, community sector and market in the provision of social services, and a healthy civil society, including the upholding of democratic processes, citizen participation and social inclusion, is predicated on achieving a balance between those sectors. However, the adoption of neoliberalism has driven the growth of the market sector, which has broad-ranging effects, as I said, not just on social policy, but on community fabric more broadly. And we have a role to play in this. We have to really be clear what we're doing when we continually move to adopt those practices. For example, in the neoliberal paradigm, people are seen in terms of their contribution to the market as consumers, customers or taxpayers, rather than as citizens with democratic rights and associated responsibility, including for the broader well-being of society. And this is at stake, I believe, in our current environment. So I'm just going to look at some of the ways that the dominance of neoliberalism, where financial and social outcomes are prioritised, public spending is reduced and the state's role is decreased, and how some of that's transferred to the private sector, how that is played out, some of the ways that that affects us. It affects us in the shape and structure of the system. So for many years now, we've seen the dominance of a small number of very large organisations in the sector, often flourishing at the expense of smaller organisations, and in the penetration of large multinational for-profit providers. It shapes the scope of organisational activities, whereby community service organisations continue to restrict their activity to service provision, good as that is, but avoiding advocacy, with those that persist in their advocacy role often feeling that they bear the cost, including losing funding. Many large community service organisations that were once outspoken advocates in their pursuit of social justice have, I believe, abandoned this role to safeguard their business interests in the nature of service provision. Scholars contend that the pursuit of neoliberal agenda in community services results in punitive, limited policies and interventions that are at odds with the purpose of the contemporary welfare state. For example, in this paradigm, economic participation is prized and the person's social worth is linked to their participation in the economy. Personal responsibility is emphasised and structural and systemic issues are downplayed. And often the market is seen as the way to solve economic and social problems. However, the reality is that they've often caused it. And a prevailing and often unquestioned belief is that the market will ensure that efficiency and effectiveness are maximised. Even if this were the case, these goals in themselves don't ensure good practice or proper treatment of people. It's also shaped how community services relate to communities with which they engage. The growing preoccupation with the managerialist agenda, where indicators of competency and outcome measures are established centrally, with a focus on efficiency, performance and compliance, means that local communities are often limited in their capacity to influence what's prioritised. So responsibility for overseeing outcomes, which have been agreed with funders, moves from communities to experts who use business and other metrics to monitor progress against targets, diminishing the role that the community plays in exercising its democratic role of oversight. Staff too can be really affected by these policies. Some would argue that working conditions change. I won't go there, but I think that staff have been socialised into accepting the underlying values and principles of neoliberalism. However, many chafe under that and feel that aren't we supposed to be doing something different? And there are many articles written in social work practice about this dissonance, and I was very surprised to read one from, I would say, a very good social work leader saying, we educate social workers in a particular way, then they get into the ground, on the ground, and there was a big disconnect for them. And the answer she proposed was not making it so idealistic in our training, rather than maybe we should be trying to change things on the ground. So, and there is some resistance to this, and individual workers do resist it, even how we talk about the people we work with. For example, we talk about them as program participants, and we actually don't use the word clients. I don't think there's a big problem with clients, but it was a deliberate step to actually point to their agency and their desire to participate and contribute, not just as service users or consumers, etc. But staff's vocational hearts tire, they get weary. And the challenge, I believe, is not so much at the level of a particular staff member, but at the organisation or sector level. Evidence of the pervasiveness of neoliberal policies and practices in the community sector is everywhere. Over the years, I've increasingly found myself in discussions, including not only in our sector, but in the Catholic sector or the faith-based sector, dominated by markets. There's talk of market share, competitive markets, saturated markets, or invited to conferences where sessions were permeated by business logic. In fact, I received an email today I shared with someone. It was all about maximising whatever we were trying to maximise. But some of the topics covered at the Third Sector Conference in 2019, for example, and this is direct quotes, developing strategies to stand out in a saturated market, merging with like-minded organisations to remain competitive in a saturated market, discovering new revenue opportunities that improve financial profitability, and my favourite of them all, using machine learning and algorithms to make interactions more human. If anyone has any insight, I didn't go to that workshop, if anyone has any insight, I'm really keen to know what they might do. So look, that's enough about our history, but providing a historical outline regarding our sector, I wanted to underline that in more recent years, I believe we have allowed ourselves to be squeezed into a shape that does not serve our larger social purpose. The sector, that is us, has largely failed to examine, resist or critique the underlying principles of the current ideology and how they manifest in the operations of the community sector, specifically the impact on the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. And some scholars say that as a consequence, we're actually assisting in the demise of our sector's value-based identity and privileging policies and practices that are at odds with it. So for this reason, I began my talk today with looking at our operating context, because in my view, the fundamental matter that we have to contend with before we move to examine what an understanding of the commons might mean for us is to first appreciate where we are now, a shrunken version of ourselves, often limited to service delivery, important, but within a neoliberal framework, allowing ourselves to be silenced in terms of key social justice issues, with our major concern being keeping or expanding our funding. I have seen this firsthand. People think they're advocating when they're advocating for funding for themselves. It's not advocacy. It might be because we have an inherent inbuilt belief that we believe we'll do it better, and I can really argue for that, and that we want to help more people. But we don't want to get carried away with the idea that we do it better. Remember the sex abuse? We have to be very vigilant. And in what ways do we do it better? So I'm not saying we don't, but I think we have to be really prepared to look at that and not just assume it. I obviously believe we can do it better because I'm critiquing the neoliberal paradigm that dominates, but I think we have to all watch what is the water we are swimming in and how much we have absorbed a lot of that. I focus on this because when I moved to consider the commons and the necessity of having a focus on ecological justice, it's not just an add-on, just another topic to get across in order to position ourselves better. It isn't a greenwashing exercise. Rather, it builds on a fundamental understanding of how we see the world, reality, and how we understand our purpose in light of that. Some of the broader social trends have been referred to, and I'll only touch on this briefly. But looking beyond the community service sector to our broader context, we notice other challenges, but ones that do impact us as a sector. The Catholic social service sector we operate within. Sometimes these factors interact with each other, sometimes in a causal way, sometimes such as a way as to compound the issue. The post-colonial context is more than a backdrop to many of these concerns. Here in Australia and elsewhere, the fate of Indigenous peoples continues to challenge us, and the recent outcome of the referendum regarding an Indigenous voice to Parliament shows that we have a long way to go to really come to terms with our history and to see improved outcomes for Aboriginal people. The growing gap between rich and poor, things like housing and cost of living stress our ageing population. The rapid change in communication technologies, how we receive our news, how we critique it, the dominance of social media, the emergence of artificial intelligence, violence and conflicts beyond those that we hear most about, for example, Palestine, Israel and Ukraine conflict, and in our region, Myanmar, there are about currently 80 armed conflicts happening around the world. The climate crisis and degradation of the environment as a result of our lifestyles, as Bishop Vincent Long pointed out yesterday, reflecting Pope Francis's encyclical. And this represents our greatest threat. The erosion of democracy, characterised by a Venezuelan journalist name, you may know him, talked about the rise of populism, polarisation and post-truth. And all of these factors impacting on the massive forced migration and displacement of people through conflicts, climate change, food insecurity, etc. Again, as Vincent pointed out yesterday, existing international structures have been found lacking or even powerless in the face of these challenges. And COVID-19 presented an opportunity to recognise the roots of much of this inequality and to take steps to address these, but structural change has not occurred. So, the church. All of these factors, I'm just going to touch on this lightly, point to the need, the value for the church to take up a broad understanding of its role of reconciliation and peace building in the world. It points to the critically important role we as a sector could play in identifying matters to be attended to if we adopt a broad understanding of the scope of our responsibility. Arguably, and Kate said this last night, that we are well positioned to identify the various challenges that are emerging in the lives of the people and communities we accompany. This is a privilege. It gives us a mandate, but also the responsibility to use that insight and knowledge well, including our advocacy isn't just out there, is it? But it's to the church, including internally advocating to the church to understand emerging challenges and to be more responsive, inclusive and agile in addressing them. As I said also though, this highlights the potential not only that the church could do, but the challenges we face in doing it in a context where there's increasing doubt about and even hostility towards institutions of all kinds, including the church. The context of secularisation, multi-faiths, consumerism, the movement of so many people away from formal religious practices, but not necessarily spirituality, and what's viewed by many, let's face it, as the sheer irrelevance of the church to people's daily lives. And then interacting with, sometimes driving this has been the impact of and the mishandling of the child sex abuse scandals within the church, leading to a further loss of confidence in and alienation of many people from the church. So this is our reality. We have this great potential. These are some of the constraints, let alone the internal tensions, I suppose, within the church. I won't go down the path, but I think we understand that there is a spectrum even within the church. It's not like we're one body and people have already pointed that out. So, just for 30 seconds, in your own way, either note or reflect for yourself. Who are we? How do we understand our purpose? What have we become? So let's turn our focus now to another key part of this topic, the commons. In the Roman era, the commons referred to those things that are common to everyone, and for the use of all. In medieval Europe, the commons referred to the way communities managed land that was held in common. Along with sharing this land, a clear set of rules was developed about how it was to be used. And this led to consideration about, well, what else does a community have rights or access to? And so over time, the commons came to have an expanded meaning from the natural resources accessible to all members of society, including forests, lands, waterways, air, and earth that's habitable, which was understood to be held in common, even when publicly or privately owned. It came to include cultural resources, literature, music, arts, to be shared among people. And increasingly, the term has been used more broadly still to incorporate the knowledge commons and, even more recently, the digital commons, such as the internet, Wikipedia, etc. Eleanor Ostrom, the American political scientist and economist who focused very much on this field of the commons, extended our understanding of it to say it is knowledge as a complex ecosystem that operates as a common, a shared resource that's subject to social dilemmas and political debates. The commons gives rise to the challenge of balancing individual needs against the needs of the larger group, and I thought Bishop Long yesterday pointed to guiding principles around that. It's not just the majority. And the potential so-called tragedy of the commons, where resources are depleted if they are not well managed, which points to building on the values, for example, that Bishop Vincent outlined yesterday. In relation to the commons, some authors distinguish between the common pool of resources, which has often been understood, which are essential for all of our well-being, its governance that ensure equity, sustainability and good stewardship, and then the community with a defined set of users who governs it. And in a term popularised by Peter Linebaugh in the 1990s, the word commoning, so a verb, to emphasise an understanding of the commons as a process and a practice rather than a particular kind of thing or a static entity. It suggests that commoning draws on a network of relationships that exists within the expectation that we'll take care of each other and with a shared understanding that some things belong to us all. These practices entail the creation of a new way of living and acting together. Understanding the commons in this way can be seen to challenge the dominant paradigm of private ownership and market-driven solutions. Just an interesting point in my reading, when there was the move from the commons some time ago, there's no doubt that women were most likely to miss out because they had been using it largely for subsistence farming, etc. And it just made me wonder who's missing out now? Who are the groups that are probably missing out as the commons is shrunk? So, reflecting on the meaning of the commons, some points to consider are: should our organisations or sector play a role in protecting the commons? What might prevent us from seeing that this is our role? Again, just 30 seconds. Experience. So, as I said, I've been asked to speak from my experience. You will all have your experiences. You will all have been grappling with these questions, I'm sure. So I'm not putting this out as a way of saying this is how we do it, but I was asked to give an example of how one community service organisation in this tradition has tried to grapple with this issue. So what we're talking about is not new. We have to continue to consider what our context is. And for many years, my concern has how we can breathe life into the gospel imperative to love one another and the call to visit those in prison, give water to the thirsty, comfort to those who grieve, not just as individuals, but as organisations. How we might do good practice, how we might shift hearts, minds and systems towards greater love and justice. I really believe in the power of institutions to be good and to do good, and I love this quote from Pope Francis. I see above all the pressing need to strengthen institutions which are a vital reserve of moral energy and civic love. He wrote this in Let Us Dream in his book in 2020 at the start of the book. So it always depends on individuals, of course, but the collective effort of those individuals, when united in a shared purpose, can have great impact. So over the years since becoming CEO of Jesuit Social Services, which is 3 years ago, as that operating context I mentioned at the beginning, our shifting operating context, rubbed up against the tenets of my faith and how I understood our role as a Jesuit Catholic community service organisation, I became increasingly interested in the area of organisation identity and the power of having a strong identity as a way to better articulate our purpose, ground us in our values, shape all our activity, and provide the ballast we need to actively choose a particular path and to resist other paths that tempted us to step away from our fundamental understanding of who we are, why we do what we do, and how we do it. Understanding our organisational identity and getting it across everything has been, from I understand, my most important task. But it's one that I wanted to make sure was contemporary, accessible, and actually useful. Not about imposing something on people. I wanted to be invitational. And again, as Claire pointed out last night, and I'll often say about our own organisation, we reflect the community we live in. We know because we collect data that literally we are a match for the community we are in. What percentage of Catholics who identify as Catholics, 20%, what percentage are from different faith backgrounds, no faith background. We're part of the community, and I believe we are stronger for reflecting that. But you don't just then slap on a Catholic identity and say, this is who you are, we want to fill you up with it, and off you go. Because actually, the people who work with us carry that. They are the ones. We can have it on the wall, we can have a great CEO who says this, or a great chair or a board. It means nothing if our people don't embody it. So we need to find ways, and I'm sure we've all been grappling with this, is how to translate this beautiful tradition, these beautiful stories that we have, into a way that are invitational and the way that invite people to come along on that journey with us. And when we do, they love it because they have vocational hearts. They've come to work in our organisations because of that reason. So it's beholden on us to really protect them, I think, from how Jesuit really are you, how Catholic really are you, to protect them from that, but also to do the work we need to do to translate our foundational stories and invite people into that. And my understanding of our foundational story has been enhanced by my dialogue and conversation. Again, as Claire pointed out last night, it's richer, it's stronger, it's actually relevant. So, just a little bit about organisational identity. Scholars in the field of organisational identity say that it addresses the question of who an organisation is or perceives itself to be. It's not a gimmick, a badge, a brand. Rather, it's been described as what is central, distinctive and enduring about an organisation. And for us to reflect on what are the elements we would say in our organisation are central, distinctive and enduring. I could talk to you about that for ages, which I won't, but all of those. You don't have a monopoly on them. like it might be integrity. You don't have a monopoly on them, but what is our way and which are those that fit all those criteria? A robust values-based identity provides a compass to guide organisations at critical times when they have to make ethical and strategic choices. It influences how staff understand themselves and their role within the organisation. It shapes the nature and quality of practice, directly affecting some of our community's most vulnerable people. It supports us to fulfil our purpose, including strengthening civil society, our engagement with the commons. It has a broad, and I will talk about the image that we've adopted soon. I'll present that shortly. But I want to say that it's something that's evolved. For us, for example, as a social change organisation with a vision of building a just society where all people can live to their full potential, over our 47 years, we've been working at the hard end of social justice in solidarity with people experiencing disadvantage and working to change policies, practices, the ideas and values that perpetuate inequality, prejudice and exclusion. But in 2008, seeing new challenges to building a just society emerge, or acknowledging them, we've been seeing them for quite a while, in light of our living, as what I've just said, in an increasingly complex era of climate crisis, environmental collapse and rising social inequity, we commenced the journey to understand the importance of ecological justice for the organisation and its intersection with social justice. And being part of an international network of Jesuit organisations, we were regularly presented with examples from all around the world from our colleagues of people on society's margins who, while often being least responsible for the ecological risks and threats that they were facing, being most affected by their emergence. So it's been a slow burn. I can remember a time on the board where someone said, isn't that an environmental organisation's role? We're on about the boys in custody. We're thinking, well, they're actually all connected, and how do we begin to tell that story? It is becoming clearer now, though, isn't it? I think when you have, was it Robin yesterday, who talked about 75% of Australians in 1 year being affected directly in terms of living in floods, fires, areas that were considered under risk. So we're getting there, we're realising. So over the last 15 years, we've been working to bring an ecological perspective to all our activity. The interconnection between environmental and social justice has influenced how we understand ourselves. It's not just an issue. Oh, we are all connected. Oh, I am relational. Oh, we are relational. Like actually something at a bit of a deeper level. It's affected our practice. Well, maybe our job is actually to strengthen and heal those relationships rather than deliver a transactional service, for example. It's influenced our policy and advocacy, what we focus on. A classic example for us, given our concern with the justice system, is how heat is weaponised in the justice system. And, for example, the removal of fans or the not building in air conditioning in climates where it can get to 40 degrees, 50 degrees. That was one of the things recognised in the Royal Commission in Northern Territory into youth justice. So we have to take these factors into account. For us, ecological justice, for us, ecological justice incorporates but goes beyond both social and environmental justice. It rests on the principle that everything is interrelated and that ethical action in the environmental sphere is central to equity at the social level. Bringing an ecological approach to our work means seeing that the way an individual and all aspects that make up their ecosystem are interrelated and impact on one another, including their social relationships, the natural systems on which they depend, for example, water, exposure to heat waves, and the built environment and human-made infrastructure that surrounds us, so like the quality of houses, access to public spaces and healthy food. Ecological justice also sees all beings as potential agents of justice, and in particular, it recognises that harms associated with environmental degradation disproportionately impact those with the least access national security and have had the least influence in causing environmental harms. Pope Francis, in his 2015 encyclical on care for our common home, Laudato Si', spelled out this destructive impact of our lifestyles predicated on greed and consumerism that see people being discarded and the environment being destroyed. I'm going to assume you know all about that and very engaged with it, so I won't go on further. But he does call us to reassess the dominant development paradigm of which neoliberalism is part and which we all operate within, and to make an assessment of that and to commit to care for the environment, recognition of the intrinsic value of nature and the interconnectedness of all life. But to go back to the beginning, that's why it's not just another issue that we have to contend with. How are we sitting within all of that? In light of Laudato Si', the value of the commons is underlined, pointing to the reality that everything is gift to be shared and to be governed with an eye to how these benefit everyone, now and in the long term. So I'm now going to move to present a little bit about as I was asked to talk about what we did and where did we come to. A very simplified picture. I'm not going to really be able to tell the whole story of how we got there, other than to say it's taken years. It's still changing. It's taken lots of thinking, conversation, reflection, discernment and engagement of many people. And I present it as a way of just demonstrating just how one organisation, us, grappled with the question of who are we, what's our purpose. I hope it has broad application and might be useful to you, but as I say, I recognise you're doing your strong wrestling with these issues. I'm just going to present the image that we ended up coming up with. So I chose the living ecological image of the tree to help us understand how organisational identity works and what is our organisational identity. Don't know about words, I can tell you a little bit about them later. So drawing on Catholic social teaching, our organisation's Ignatian and Jesuit heritage and synthesised with my own lived experience, this model emerged over time. A tree, I think is very useful. The roots depict our foundational values, whatever you might identify them to be in your life, from our heritage. The trunk, the body of the organisation, the branches, our programs and advocacy, and the leaves, our staff out there in the world. That's just a high-level picture. So just as the branches and leaves of the organisation deteriorate and disconnected from healthy roots, the organisation suffers when it becomes detached from its deep values expressed in the elements depicted in the roots. This might manifest in reduced quality of programs or disengagement of staff, etc. And similarly, when the lived expression of solidarity with people and communities and creations is diminished out here, or the organisation's people are not valued for their vital roles, so think about the leaves, the very heritage that has given birth to the entity suffers because it is a dynamic relationship. When I first started playing with this image, I had all the sort of identity in the roots and thought about how it was sort of pumped up into shaping us and how we are in the world. The longer I thought about this image, I realised, well, if you cut off the tree from the roots, it dies. But guess what? If you cut this off from the roots, they die. Because the leaves and the trunk and everything else play a role in the whole life of the tree. So this became a really important image for us to understand, which is why we don't just pump up the identity into people, tell them, go out and do it. It has to be socially constructed at the same time as being something tangible that we offer. But it is a dynamic process. And so I believe that we, all of us, and again, I thought Claire's discussion of presentation last night, we are keeping these roots alive. And not just Catholics keeping them alive. And we invite people into that story. But we need to make it accessible, respectful, useful. Staff not only give expression to our organisational identity out there in the world, but contribute to and enrich the living heritage of the organisation. The heritage feeds them, and then their solidarity and engagement with the world helps to transform the world. Just think of oxygen being transformed out into the environment. But it then sends, as I said, nourishment back to the roots. And like the leaves of the tree, which are exposed to the sunlight, the more staff in our services maximise, more we maximise our exposure. Think of leaves that's flat, there's a reason they're flat, to maximise their exposure to the sun. The more we, in and out, ourselves, but increase our exposure, the more we are able to undertake the process of photosynthesis, or take the energy in, transform it, send oxygen out to make the community and the world healthier, and send nutrients down to our roots. The tree image is also useful in orienting us to see our broader role within the community, and this is relevant for our understanding of the commons. Beyond the reciprocity of relationships within the tree, as we said, the roots, the leaves, the other part of the tree, a tree does not function as an independent organism. From the roots to the leaves, there's reciprocity of relationship between the tree and its environment. The roots not only nurture the tree, they also bind the soil and enjoy an expansive underground network of support and communication well beyond the limits of its own entity. Our very foundations are reaching out to others and can strengthen the roots of others. We can join others, and these are the basis of having a strong civil society. The trunk and branches of the tree provide a home to animals, birds, bees and insects. I believe our organisations can provide a home for fellow searchers. The leaves not only function to support the tree through the process of photosynthesis, but also produce oxygen, upon which all life depends, again out into the commons. They sequester carbon, provide food, shade and beauty. A tree is an image of beauty. We want our organisations to be signs of hope. We desperately need signs of living hope. And we can be that if this is how we are living, our relationships are respectful and loving, if we are true to our purpose. Like trees, organisations are situated in and adapt to their environments. Organisational members of these perceive and feed back to the organisation what's happening in the world. Reading the signs of the times, they tune into emerging needs, threats and opportunities, which allows the organisation to respond in a nimble and timely manner and to evolve. As a social change organisation, identity does not exist only for itself and the various activities it undertakes. Just as the tree is part of its ecosystem, the organisation is part of the community, part of our sector, part of the church, and seeks to make a contribution to the life of all of those, recognising that in turn it's part of and supported by theirs. This is very different from the concept of a for-profit company operating in a transactional way, delivering a government-funded contract. So we've got to make sure we don't become like that, because it has a different understanding of reality and of our purpose. And 6 elements that speak to our identity, I'll share them. You might have different ones. And they are, and I'll go back to that, I'll come to that in a minute. And they are love, oneness, gratitude, solidarity, margus, a very Jesuit word, which I'll come back to, and discernment. And these form a dynamic that support the operationalisation of what we call our way of perceiving, which is all of this only comes to life in and through us, our people, our practice, how we go about doing it, and our business processes, and we'll come to that in a minute. So love being the deepest root down there. Saying, now, depending who we're talking to, we can talk about it in very religious language, that love is God's self freely given, the unifying mystery at the heart of life, the deepest foundational element of the heart of any endeavour. People, most of that language, people can really accept, sign on to, be inspired by love. People, when I talk about this at orientation, they go, oh, it's so good for us to be talking about love. I'm so glad we're talking about love. That's often not how we talk about our work, so love. Oneness reflects that's the next root, reflects the understanding that everything proceeds from and returns to God. We'll talk about it in this way here. God's present and labouring in all things. But it also points to that our essence and the essence of everything is relation. It goes beyond interdependence, actually, to situate all of our relationships as part of a whole. And this element highlights the reality that we are all held, nurtured and sustained in a web of relationships. So for us, I found the fundamental thing is that's our understanding of reality. And because we understand that, we then go, well, our purpose is to strengthen, heal or regenerate that web of relationships, whether it be air, water, land, mother, school, community, self, other relationships. So relationships is understood as our essence rather than an approach we adopt. So rather than we want to adopt a relational approach to our work, it comes back from everything. I'm inherently relational. And if you want to get theological about it, God, the Trinity, is inherently relational. So it's like in our DNA, that's what we're reflecting here. It also points to the importance of adopting a universal global perspective in understanding the reality and of injustice, because everything is interconnected. Gratitude is our response to the reality that's spelt out of our love and oneness. It's appreciating the fact that everything is gift, and this orients our hearts towards generosity. It fosters the disposition to be free and available to respond to the invitation to collaborate with God in the work of love, healing and reconciliation. Basically to have the freedom, inner freedom, to stop doing some things and to start doing others. To take new risks, to go to new places, to be flexible, nimble and adaptable. And it provides a hopeful starting point. Love, oneness and gratitude get operationalised for us through what we call our way of working, which is our people, human spirit, our practices, our doing and our influencing, and our business processes. So they're lovely words, love, oneness, gratitude, but the way they hit the ground is actually through us, through how we do our work and our advocacy, hopefully differently, and our business processes which give tangible expression to our identity. For example, our treatment of people, our administrative quality processes like HR, like child safeguarding, like where are our investments, what are we doing about our investments, what are we doing about our church's investments, etc. And it points to the role, this points to the role a community service organisation can play beyond its most apparent functions and underlines our responsibility for the commons. Solidarity, which is our approach out in the world, is the expression of our love, oneness and gratitude. And it points to us standing shoulder to shoulder with people. It challenges us to build communities of justice and solidarity where people participate, where people have a say, where people build communities of justice. It calls us to speak truth to power and to change unjust structures. It's reflected in our approach to the natural environment and where we give expression and a commitment to our communities. Marges and discernment are up and down the trumpet tree in a dynamic. Marges is a familiar Jesuit term, a Latin word meaning more, but it reflects our wholehearted desire for love and service and our understanding that we're called to be part of God's loving action in the world. In enacting our purpose, it's not just about more and more busyness, but helps us to choose the more loving, effective, influential option, the option that meets the greatest need, and is the best among a whole suite of good options. So taking that time to discern, and discernment is the other final element, which must be in an ongoing dynamic. The process of discernment, helping us be contemplatives in action every day, just part of our DNA, part of how we operate. So I'm going to just pull that together because it's probably a lot to say. We have a schema which hopefully pulls it together. So our foundations of love and oneness prompt our response of gratitude that directs our purpose, which is to strengthen, heal and regenerate the web of relationships across people, place and planet. This is operationalised through our way of proceeding, that is through our people, our practice and our processes. And it's reflected in our approach of solidarity with people, communities and the natural world. And it's oriented by our guiding principle of the margis, what is the more loving and influential thing we can do here, and our process of discernment, hopefully supporting us to be contemplatives in action. So, as a community service organisation, this understanding of our organisational identity has helped us to see our work within the Commons as consistent with our purpose of strengthening and healing relationships, our understanding of the interconnectedness of all things, and the approach of solidarity, which is essentially our commonality. It allows us to value collaboration among diverse stakeholders, to prioritise inclusion and the promotion of the common good. It reinforces the need for local initiatives where people have agency while prioritising addressing structural inequities, social, economic and environmental. So let's just take, we're nearly there, let's just take a moment to reflect on that. How do I understand my organisation's purpose? What are the central, distinctive and enduring elements that make up my organisation's identity? How do I understand the intersection of social and environmental injustice, not just out there, out here? And what would it look like if my organisation took an active role in protecting the commons? I'm sure these are questions, maybe asked a different way, that occupy much of your thought and consideration already. But just to put that there for a minute, take a photo, think about it, reject it, just be quiet for 30 seconds. So to conclude, I've outlined our context, the community sector, indicated my belief that we have allowed our purpose to be shrunk in accord with the paradigm we operate within, which then doesn't leave us as fit for our purpose as we could be, nor as ready to respond to the broader social trends that we've outlined. I suggested that if we expand our understanding of our responsibility to address the intersection of social and environmental justice, we have a powerful role to play within the church and more broadly, especially given our grounded experience with people and margins and what we are picking up daily. We can help the church stay in touch with and be responsive to the world's needs, cognizant of them, of course, of we don't want to start getting carried away with how great we are. We've got a history that we have to actually take into account. I talked about the power of institutions to do good and the importance of having a strong values-based identity. I gave just one example and you will have yours. So just to finish off, I mentioned the other elements of action and reflection, action and evaluation. So a question for action. What actions can I take that reflect an understanding of the intersection of social and environmental justice? And what actions can my organisation or sector take to protect the commons? And in terms of evaluation, in our tradition, Ignatius would have us ask, what is the most loving, influential, strategic or deeply transformational action I can take? Parker Palmer, and that's some of you may know him, an American Quaker, says, we're always being asked to demonstrate our effectiveness. And that's good. But if that's our only benchmark, there's a tendency to shrink our aims and actions to one where we can demonstrate good results. He says that if we want to wrestle with the really big questions of our time, we need another standard to measure ourselves by. And he suggests faithfulness. So finally, what are the measures I use to evaluate my response to the world's needs? Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Julie. There is much to contemplate and reflect on. And you've asked us a heap of questions, which is great. I just know from my personal reflection that the connection between the social and the ecological is something that in my organisation, I felt is a little bit leave the ecological to one side, but you've really challenged me to think about how we bring this together. And that idea of how do we, what was that the measure in the Parker about faithfulness? It's beautiful how we might measure our impact that way. We've got a few minutes for questions. You've got lots of questions to take away as Julie's challenged us on a few things. But is there any questions you'd like to ask Julie now in the last little bit of minutes we've got before morning tea? Any questions for Julie? There is one over here. We'll get you a microphone. Thanks. The microphone person. And there's one down the back as well. All right, we'll start. Down the back first, thank you. Oh no, we'll go with you. Go for it.
Thank you very much. That was just inspiration. So you were saying that you were alluding to the fact that sadly we do need the services to be funded. And so there appears, as I said yesterday, to be a bucket of money that is legislatively blocked, and that is to do with tax. And that is to do with specifically the profits being driven by the minority of fossil fuel oligarchs. And whether you're in a position to, with all your networking, to demand that we have a change that releases the oligarchs from those billions that they receive annually in fossil fuel profits to be released to the individual, as happens in the Norwegian society, where individual families are recipients of $100,000 in grants annually.
Thanks. I think I've wrestled with this a lot myself about lovely painting that picture, Julie. What are we supposed to do? And 70% of our funding, for example, is from government grants. And I'm very grateful to receive those. I think one of the things you have to distinguish is what we can do as individual organisations. And I'll give an example. Our own organisation right now is doing a lot of advocacy to ESTA, because that has been the default superannuation fund, for example, for our sector. They have got Santos and Woodside on notice because of their expanding gas explorations, but they're still heavily invested in them. And I think as members, we should be saying we don't want that. So there's what we can do as individuals, there's what we can do as organisations. We're not getting very far, by the way, but we regularly be in touch with them. We try and get the VCOS and ACOS as well about what we can do. So there's also what we can do as a sector, and that's what I'm hearing you say. As a sector, I'm sure we could do more around some of these issues. So, you know, that question for me, at an individual level, we have to wrestle with when the large multinational for-profit detention organisations, I'm talking about prison in the justice system, entered our space, and I know St Vincent's also had to deal with this. We chose not to partner with them. One of them said, I don't know why, we've got the same values. And I thought, well, that's not how I see it. But, you know, we were also doing advocacy to government about not bringing private prisons in. So we chose that. Another organisation chose to partner with them because they wanted to stay close to the people doing that work, so the people they were working with, those in custody. And so we'll all come to different points about what we decide. But we should be really clear about why we were doing it. So that's at an individual organisation level. At a sector level, I think they're the kind of conversations that would be great if we had together. We've done a lot of advocacy within the Jesuits, for example, about divesting from fossil fuels, and they have done that. I know a lot of church organisations have done that. So what you might do as an organisation, what can we then do as a sector? And there are a myriad of issues that we have to do, but I don't think we've got the platforms for those at the moment.
There's another question up there. Here. Just up the front here on the left.
Julie, my name's Anne, I'm from Vinnie's. Wonderful to hear your way of thinking and acting. My question is, how do you, as an organisation, take on board the insights and understanding of the people you work with? Do you have a way of learning, incorporating, understanding that you could share with us?
Thank you. We have multiple ways, but we could be a lot better. I think we can always improve how we do that. So we do things like an annual census where we use what we call our way of working. So we've established a way of working, which is not the metrics that government is after. We're very happy to meet those, like have we improved housing and all that, but we look for things like, have people got an increased sense of their worth and their connectedness with each other and with the environment, so valuing self, others and the environment. Another one is, do people have a stronger sense of hope and aspiration? It's V-A-L-U-E, value, V-A-L. Are people better linked into services and into the community? Have people been able to upgrade their skills and participation? And E, enhanced civic participation. Do people have a sense of their agency more? Are they voting? Are they volunteering somewhere? Are they contributing somewhere? So we've developed a way of working. It's based on an acronym value. That's what we're seeking to assess. Yes, with government, say for example, a tender around criminal justice, you know, have they got housing, have they got employment, have they offended? We're happy to answer those. But we're not just after that. We want this other. We want, if we're in that space, that people will understand their own value and purpose more, that they're less likely to hurt other people because of that, etc. So I won't repeat that, but we do things like an annual census, we do things like contacting people as they exit the service. We also have different programs that are stronger than others in actually engaging people right from the beginning in the co-design of things in terms of our making sure we include amongst our staff people with lived experience. But we can get better, definitely. And it's a focus actually in our current strategic plan to develop frameworks to improve that.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks for those questions. I think we've run out of time, but Julie, thank you so much. There's some of these things are an ongoing process, but how making sure that our agencies don't just go down whatever the government wants us to do, or the mainstream society are telling us we need to be able to use our organisational identities to bring hope to the world and to transform the world. And government policy doesn't always do that. So, well, thank you so much for your sharing of your wisdom and your knowledge. It's been a real blessing for all of us in the room. We have a small gift somewhere that we've got. Josh, where's your small gift that we've got? He's got them over here.
I'm going to have to declare it. Business processes.
Thank you.